Hi, Ina.
Hi, Sarah.
It's nice to chat with you again.
Yeah.
We've gotten to know each other pretty well over the last year, I'd say, as we both have joined forces with Magnolias. And I'd love it if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey. What's gotten you to where you are today?
Thank you, Sarah. That's a big question. And I realize that we have to be very succinct here. So, well, the way I've talked about my journey, I think of it as myself as the person who tends to the Mediterranean garden. I speak a lot in metaphors, and whoever knows me knows about my love of plants and plant world and all of that. But when I think of myself about the Mediterranean garden and me being the tender of that garden, the person who cares for it, I think of myself as the one who opens doors of light, gets to know these plants. Each of these plants are doors of light that opens up so much more for our human world in ways that we could have never imagined. And I think the way I've come to understand that particular way of being, and I'll get to me, but I think where I've landed is that we as human beings are whole human knowers and whole human beings, and we live in a world where we're part of the system and we are the system. And this whole knowing or whole being has sort of different pathways, different ways of being understood and witnessed. There is a human way of knowing, then there is a non-human way of knowing, and then there is a beyond human way of knowing. When I say knowing, it's knowing and being. It's both the what we call in academia the epistemology, it's the doing, the knowledge, and the ontology, or the being. It's how am I in the world, how am I experiencing the world, etc. But these three ways of being, I think, are pretty important because in a way they pave a reality for which I feel compelled to contribute and speak to. And the human way of knowing, it's basically the scientific way, the one that we've been a part of for generations and generations, the kind of, I think, Sarah, earlier you talked about the machine way of being and the machine way of knowing, or the linear thinking, or the masculine, or the left brain paradigm. So that's sort of what I'm calling the scientific way. And then we've got this indigenous way. And the indigenous way is the voice of the suppressed, the voice of the colonized. I'm not just talking here about indigenous tribes or indigenous cultures. I'm also talking here about women. I'm putting women in this bucket, in this cluster, the voice of the oppressed. And then we've got the children's way, which is pretty unique because children are very different than adults. They come into the world with a beautiful way of knowing. We come to the world with this beautiful way of knowing, and then we kind of lose track of it. We then spend the rest of our life trying to self-remember, okay? And then we've got the non-human way of knowing, which is the plant's way. And then we've got the animal's way. They all have consciousness. There's tons of research out there that speaks to not only that they can communicate, but they're capable of cognition. particularly about plants. Animals are different. And then we've got, my son really calls me on this, but he wants to make sure I do talk about fairies and other things, other non-human things, if you will, because in his perspective, fairies help us with imagination. And then finally is the beyond human way, which is what I call the collective consciousness. It's sort of the field of awareness that brings us all together. Me and you are connected in unbelievable ways that we are just not able, because of our limited human perception, we're just not able to conceptualize. And again, there's research, we have stories of synchronicity or stories of healing and stories of that kind where, or manifesting that will show up and then we're like, unbelievable. It's believable because we're connected. And then the last thing is the unknown or the dark matter. Science has been trying to study it, but it's this idea for now that there is so much more out there we don't know. I'm just going to leave it at that level. And so to be a whole human in the world, we need to tap into these different ways of knowing. And what we have been tapping primarily is just a fraction of it. It's the human way, the scientific way. And so when you ask me who am I or what is my work or my story, I think I'm 35 this year, and I think the past 35 years of my life I've spent my living experience trying to make sense of who we are as beings, and why can't I call on my plant friend as ways of knowing that are accepted, or my animal friends in the same way, but we have to accept certain ways. So I'm the person who tends to this Mediterranean garden because wants to open doors for people and humanity to connect deeper with nature, to connect deeper with that part of us that we have suppressed, we have left aside, we no longer count and recognize and legitimize.
So you say you're the farmer of this garden. I love that metaphor. I think in pictures, so for me, I could just draw such a great, beautiful drawing of you right now. How do you nurture that garden? Is it through magnolias that you're seeing part of that growth happening?
Yeah, that's a good one. So, yeah, through magnolia as a plant for sure calls me. It's one of those that I have in the garden. They grow very well in the Mediterranean. So magnolias are a very powerful plant to have in your garden. They have beautiful fragrance. They have that sort of feminine quality, and then again they have that resilience or that strength and resilience together. That's what they symbolize for me. The magnolias as an entity or as a movement or as a group of women has been a really interesting place for me to actually cultivate those different ways of being that I spoke to earlier. It's really about a space to develop those qualities of intuition and spaciousness and creativity, and I think it's a really the nurturing of it comes from being in spaces where people, and women in particular, come together to not only nurture a garden. We're using the garden now, let's say the garden is the world, not only to nurture the garden, but also to nurture each other. I think of magnolias as I know we've talked about the pollinator of pollinators, but it's sort of this garden of very unique plants, which we all are, the founding group, or the seed group, let's put it that way. The seed group is founding the garden, is putting the first intentions for what this garden could look like and be like. And then through this process of tending to each other, one day I need some water, the next day Sarah needs some water, another day Jackie may need some sun, or the following day Roberta may need some sun, or Anne, or Denise, or Tanya, or Kim, or Laura. So it's sort of figuring out that cycle. And I think the more we can do that intentionally, the more we can develop a narrative that serves the world in bigger ways. So yeah, I think that's how I get nourished. And I feel my intention for being in this space is not just to take action in the traditional form we think of action, because action feels like we must do something. We need to put a website out. We need to do. Remember, the doing is so much scientific way, and we focus so very little in the being and these other ways of knowing. So I feel Magnolia is modeling the being way. And being a women's group does not mean, because this is something I quite often bring up for myself, because I'm not the kind of person that we might only have women groups, we must have women groups. But it's something unique and special at the times we're living. We need the quality that women bring. And in the women, there is the masculine quality, because, you know, we have the yin and yang. The yin tends to have the more feminine energy, the yang more masculine energy. When we manifest, we get something done, we get the masculine over. And then when we're more into this percolating, deep listening, that's the feminine. And so we need that balance. But however, women are real activators of this new way of being in the world. And I think that's what Magnolia is. It's an activator for a new way of being in the world, modeling that and then allowing and sitting with it. So it's a balance.
How do you see the future? If we have groups like Magnolias who are able to be in the world and bring that way, that type of energy into the world, how do you see our future?
There's two things that are coming to mind. One, there is a quote by Michelangelo who says, "I carved an angel in the stone, and I carved until I set it free." And I love that quote. I'm not a big fan of Michelangelo, but I love that quote. And the reason I do is because it really speaks to the tending, the patience, the staying with it, and the trust. He carved and he carved until he set it free. And I see Magnolia as being that that energy that sort of carves and carves until it sets it free, sets free this new way of being in the world, this whole way of being in the world. And so that's one thing that comes to mind, just as a starting place. And then the second thing that shows up is this wonderful painter, which I really love, Swedish painter, Hilma af Klint. She has some amazing works. They were featured at the Guggenheim a year ago. It had been in her dream She didn't know Guggenheim existed. This was in the 1920s, I think, something like that. I think she left for sure 70 years ago, so I'm not very good with remembering the dates here. But in any case, she had this vision and she wanted to feature her paintings, which were called Paintings for the Future, into a space that had sort of a spiral sense, a spiraling movement. And she had asked the guy who started Waldorf, Rudolf Steiner. She had asked Rudolf Steiner to help her at that time to publish this work and to exhibit. And he kept a close relationship with her, served sort of like a guide and a mentor, but really did not promote her work. Instead, he promoted Kandinsky's work, who was known sort of the first abstract painter of Europe and the world. He made that name. And it's also been said that they were Kandinsky's paintings that Hilma af Klint, was Hilma af Klint's paintings that Kandinsky had been inspired by through this Rudolf Steiner connection. This is work based on a documentary that was then done by for Hilma af Klint so I'm going to trust the people of the art here who have done the research in my claims. But I could feel it. I could feel it in my bones. I can trust it in my bones. And there is this story of suppression yet more that was not allowing this new way of knowing. Hilma af Klint's work were very much about bringing forth. She was a deep listener, just like you, Sarah, and she would bring forth her ways of knowing through painting in ways that were unimaginable and not accepted for that time. She had faith and she had trust, and she said, "Don't open my works until 70 years after my death, and then they must be exhibited into this sort of spiral place." And Guggenheim took the lead on it and was phenomenal, was fantastic. I guess to make the point, because I have a story and then I go in circles, but to make the point, in the two stories that I shared, the Michelangelo story and then the Hilma af Klint story, and to respond to your question of where do I see the future and how do I see magnolias play a role in it, I think it's the role of the tender, is the role of the artist, is the role of the energy that holds space for things to happen, that holds space for this intuitive way of knowing to emerge and to be patient, whether it's through tapping through other groups of women who are doing similar work, whether it's through simply holding space for this very small group of women and then continuing to put that love message into the world, whether it's through taking action or particular issues. For me, a big issue is education. How do we look at education and bring this whole ways of knowing in ways that become acceptable? So Magnolia could very well hold space for that, because it's all about bringing this intuitive ways of knowing that women know very well about. And then there is representation and there's politics. There's so many ways and so many places where magnolias can make a difference. But it's about holding space, and it's about intention, and it's about patience and process. A lot of patience.
Yeah, we could use a little more patience in the world, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Ina, give me your bumper sticker. I'm Ina. This is what I do.
And I speak for the trees. It's like, I'm the Lorax and I speak for the trees. I honestly think I am Lorax and I speak for the trees, so I will use that. Yeah, I am Lorax and I speak for the trees, which everyone needs, but not in that sense. And I think that The Lorax is a really beloved book, and I think my work is really bringing voice, making the invisible visible, and shedding more lights, opening more doors of light to make these non-traditional, alternative, or what we call holistic ways of knowing be part of who we are. Accept them, legitimize them, and stop hiding. So I do this work through many tracks, or through many through different places, whether it's through George Washington University, where I run executive education and coaching, whether it's through the Magnolias group and giving again my contribution into that space. But I feel my calling in the world is to make the invisible visible. That's my calling.